Do I need a hat? You think I need a hat? Do I need a hat? Nah, haircut. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the exposure triangle. What is it? Who knows? Let's do that. Hello everybody.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Hello. What is the exposure triangle? It's quite simple really. It's composed of 3 points: ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. Simple. Thank you for watching. Only joking. So all the 3 points of the exposure triangle affect each other. So ISO, aperture, and shutter speed are interchangeable. So you can change between the 3 of them to affect your image and make sure that you get the perfect exposure. Now, I preface this, the perfect exposure is all subjective with photography. It's an art form after all, so it's what you feel looks nicest for the image or the story that you're trying to tell at that point. But it is always helpful to shoot it exposed correctly, especially in RAW files, so you can actually adjust it a lot more yourself if you want to. You don't have to rely on what the camera is trying to do. That's another video altogether about RAW. So ISO, what is it? Well, top line, it's all about sensitivity. Sensitivity of your sensor, which is what records the photo in your camera. In the olden days, your sensor was a roll of film. Roll of film was rated by ISO, so people would get different types of film rating for whatever type of things that they were shooting, or they would just get a kind of generic one so that it would work most places. So the higher the number, the more sensitive, and the lower the number, the less sensitive. So with the high number, that'll be when you want to use your camera in more low light situations, but that will introduce a lot more noise and grain into your image that you might not necessarily want. And then the lower number makes it a lot crisper, cleaner, and generally the images will look a lot sharper. But that does require you to adjust some of the other settings in the exposure triangle to make sure that you're not going to get a really blurry image, especially if you're using it in low light. Shutter speed. You'll see this measured in fractions. So at the moment, as I previously stated in my last video, I do 180-degree shutter rule. So this is currently recording at 1/50th of a second. So it's a bit different for video, but for photography, 1/50th of a second is quite a slow shutter speed relatively. You would get a lot more motion blur if you were taking an image, or you would be on a tripod like I currently am with this camera. But if you were capturing motion, say sports photographer will use a higher shutter speed to capture that motion so they don't get any blurry images of the sportsman, I know Usain Bolt crossing the finish line at his super fast, ridiculous speed. They'll track him, click, and they'll take that shot and they'll get it, and they'll reel off quite a few hundreds of them at that speed, because you can do. Now, shutter speed gives you a lot more creative things. So you've seen my previous videos on the still wall photography. Now we used quite low shutter speeds for that. So we were on a tripod, it was all stable, so the shutter was open for a long time and allowed us to capture that motion as long as possible with the dark surroundings around us, and then it would close and it would capture that image. Aperture. What is aperture? Now you may have seen it referred to as the f-stop. So what does it mean? Aperture, essentially, is the hole in the lens. Quite simply. What maths, people that enjoy the maths, and I don't mind a little bit of maths from time to time when it dictates it. So with this one, so there's an 85mm. If you divide that by the width of the opening of the lens, when it's kind of connected to a camera, say that was 45mm, it's f1.8. That's the number you get back if you do the maths, which I did on my phone, because I can't do mental maths, because I can't. So what does aperture affect? Obviously, the bigger the hole, the more light is let through, which is great. But what that can also introduce is reductions in sharpness and also depth of field changes. So depth of field is quite a complicated thing. You may have seen in my last video about the extension tubes. You can see some real effects of depth of field in real life in that video. So depth of field is all about the focus plane of a lens. For example, here. So the bigger the aperture has a smaller depth of field. So meaning if you move ever so slightly forward or back, you will lose that focus. So in portraits, it can be quite difficult to get a focus on an eye or anything like that. If you're doing landscape and you're trying to focus on an up front detail, you will blur the background out completely, meaning that you will lose all kind of detail and you just get nice, what's called bokeh, B-O-K-E-H, for those, Japanese word. It means infidelity and blur, basically. It's a clever thing. You may see a lot of phones have functionality of that nowadays, although a lot of the time they use a mixture of software and hardware to do it, because they don't have the depth, physical depth and the size of the sensor to actually get a proper, true bokeh effect. Now with a bigger number, say something f11, f13, you'll get a lot more in focus. That's why you'll see a lot more landscape photographers will use higher aperture numbers just to make sure they can get everything in focus from the distance all the way up to foreground interest images. So there are a few things you want to look at when about shutter speed. Now if you want to do long exposure shots in the daytime, you're going to need ND filters. Now that stands for neutral density filters, and what they basically are, as everyone calls on the internet, sunglasses for your lens. Basically, that's in essence what it is. So I've got a pack of them. You get them in various different densities. So this one's quite not that dense, so you can see through it still quite, but I've got quite a big one which will block out a lot of light, so you can't see my face. But this would mean I'd have to have the shutter open for a few minutes at times on some exposures, which I'll link an image right now. You can also get ones like this. This is a variable one. So this is for one of my other lenses, where what this one does is it rotates from a point to a point and will give you less light. Really good for video, or if you're kind of run and gun, going around, you're taking photos in the daylight and you want to just keep your aperture high to get some really nice shallow depth of field images, but you're in kind of lighter situations. So it's good to have a different stock of them. Like I said, they come in square ones where you have to have a little tray that they go in. You get round screw-on ones, all varying different sizes. To sum up, so ISO is about sensitivity, aperture is about the size of the opening in the front to let light in, and shutter speed is how long the shutter is open for. So it's a creative process. You can move between those two. The more familiar you are with your camera settings, you can do that on the fly quickly without having to look at anything, especially in situations of weddings when I've shot them, where you have to adjust it because the light changes, different rooms, you're pointing at different people, you have to adjust it on the fly basically. Whereas landscape photography, you've got a little bit more time, more or less, to sit, compose your image, set the settings as you want it to, think about it a little bit more, and then kind of get that shot. But with the benefits of raw files, you can adjust them quite easily. So I hope that helped. Quite a simple video for those that know about photography already, but for those that are learning or they're beginner photographers, it's going to be quite helpful for you just to kind of get some basic knowledge on it. The only way you can really learn photography is with a camera in your hand, out taking photos of whatever. And I know that's difficult at the moment, so maybe try something like getting some extension tubes like I talked about in my last video, and just having a little play. Anything, just be creative. So, thank you for watching, and again, I hope this video helped. Please like and subscribe, all the normal stuff that you do on YouTube videos that are such fantastic content like mine. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one.